Hello. Hello. Happy National Fast Food Day. I wish there wasn't anyone. At a day like this, I boycotted fast food hamburger places now for 22 years. Thank you. Thank you. Doesn't matter your decisions as long as you have an opinion of something and you go with it. All right? You can have your own rationale, but stand up for something that you believe in your life. Just don't go through your life meandering. Right? Be someone. Make the right choice. Here we go. We're now getting in. Speaking of making the right choice, the next two sections in this course, you're going to have to make the right choice in terms of paying attention and bearing down and enduring some mental pain because it is going to be somewhat challenging. Know that up front. You're going to reverse your thinking in this section. Instead of going from equation to graph, we're now switching it from graph to equation. And so we're going to use the same exact equations that we used before, except we're going to be solving for a different variable. The first problem on 4.4 is just how you find the equation of this line. Don't want to spend a lot of time with this. You're going to look at the data. What is your slope? What is your y-intercept? You plug that into y equals mx plus b, and you get your equation. Same thing is going to be true for the trig functions. You get your data, you plug them into your general equation, and you get your specific equation. We're going to have some rules that we're going to follow in this class, so we're talking the same language. You see, when you find the equation for a trig function, there's an infinite amount of correct answers. And so we have to decide what we're going to be looking at and where to start in terms of getting a trig equation. And so the first thing that we're going to do is try to identify what your A, B, C, and K are of the equation. But when you are trying to choose which general equation you want, you need to be able to line it up and figure out which one you want to choose. For example, you may have a graph that looks exactly like a sine graph. A positive sine graph starts in the middle and goes up. If that's the case, you know you absolutely want to use a positive sign. But if you see a graph where you're starting at 0 and going down, you know on that graph you want to choose a negative sign because there is no phase shift. And the same thing is true for cosine. If the graph looks like that, you want to use positive cosine. But if you're looking at a graph that looks like this, you know you want to use a negative cosine. Again, because there's no phase shift, you want to keep it simple. If it lines exactly up with the negative, you want to use the negative. That's the only time you use the negative. If it has a phase shift, you want to use a positive sign or cosine with the least phase shift possible. And that's what these last two conditions mean, the C and D. The C says use negative if the sine and cosine graphs have no phase shift. That would be the red graphs. And then the D says shift the least left or right to find either of the two graphs, meaning shift the left or right. What is the least phase shift that you would move in order to have a positive sine or positive cosine? Wherever it's the least, that's what you choose. And then you go up and get your A, B, C, and D. A, B, C, and K. So choosing the correct sine or cosine is important when we get started, and we're going to follow these as we go through. For your homework tonight, it should be pretty straightforward. Tomorrow, graphs become a little bit harder. For these story problems that I have as a handout, they're going to become even harder yet. Everything is going to be exactly the same thing as you go through. But for example, if you have a phase shift, you're going to be given the phase shift. That's going to be a number, and then you're going to have this as a number, and then you're going to make that as an equation, and you're going to solve for C. Let's look at some easy graphs where you don't have to go through everything here, because sometimes if there's only one thing that's different, it's easy to see what your equation is. If I look at this graph, it's one cycle, and the question is, what's the equation, the trig equation of this graph? So I'm going to look back here, and these graphs are so basic that I think that if you just pay attention on these, you'll see that there's just one little switch, which isn't going to be that hard to write down the equation. Now, when I look at this, I'm going to see it goes from 0 to 2 pi. That's one cycle. That's the same. The only thing different is that it goes up to 3 and down to 3. So my A is equal to 3. I'm dealing with a positive sign because it starts in the middle and goes up, and my A is 3. That's the only difference. I don't have to go through and figure out what my B is because I know it's the same thing as the general one. So now I can just go ahead and write Y is equal to 3 sine X. Again, period is 2 pi. That matches up. Nothing's really different except for that 3. Let's look at this one. And again, the question is, what is different compared to the regular graph? Starts in the middle, goes up. I now see it's going to be a positive sign again. First thing I want to identify. Then the question is, what's different than the original? Well, one thing that's different is that the amplitude is 3. My A is going to equal 3. The other thing that's different is it completes one cycle right there. And so I know that the period is going to be pi and not 2 pi. So I have to determine what is my B if I know the period is pi and not 2 pi. So I'm just going to write a little equation here. And it's coming from the period equals 2 pi over B. All you're doing is substituting in. The period is pi equals 2 pi over B. Some of you can see that B is going to equal 2 because it divides out. Or the other way is just cross multiply and solve. Pi B equals 2 pi, and your B is going to equal 2. You have your A, you have your B. There is no C, there is no phase shift, there is no K, there's no vertical shift. And you're dealing with a positive sign, you now can write the equation. Y equals 3 sine 2x. You're just plugging the 2 in for the B. Again, this should be relatively easy, but you're going to have a real hard time doing the other work if you don't have the basics down. This becomes a little bit more challenging. What I would encourage you to do is draw in the sinusoidal axis, or the axis that's in the middle of the graph. So I'm going to go ahead and graph that in. And you're going to see that it goes through 2. And if you do that, you can see what your A should be and what your phase shift, your vertical shift should be. So now that it's getting a little bit more complicated, I want to make sure I get all the information that I need. First thing I want to do, identify the trig function, positive, negative sine, positive, negative cosine. Starts in the middle and goes up. Exactly. There's no phase shift, so I'm still talking positive sign. Then I want to find out my period. My period is where it goes through one cycle. That's going to be from here to here, and then you see it's going to start repeating. That's going to be pi units, and I know, so A is equal to 3. Let me back up and explain why that's 3. It's the distance from here to here. That's your A. Your B is going to be equal to where you have to determine it from the period. Well, if it's pi, I know I just did this. Pi is equal to 2 pi divided by B. Your B is going to be equal to 2 again. So I have my A, I have my B. There is no phase shift. I don't have to worry about my C. The only thing I have to think about now is my K. My K is the shift up or down. The way you figure that out is you look and see from your x-axis, what is the shift to your new axis, and you see that's going to be up 2. So your K is going to be equal to 2. Now I have everything that I need. I go ahead and write down the equation. Y equals 3 sine bx, which is 2x, plus my k, which is going to be up 2. Getting a little bit more complicated, still just breaking it down into parts and getting your letters. Here's another graph, and we're going to go through the same procedure. The first thing I want to do is see if there's any phase shift. So you're looking at the y-axis, and when you look at the y-axis, you're thinking to yourself, is it a perfect, does it match up perfectly with sine, negative sine, cosine, or negative cosine? And the answer is, I start with it low and go up high, and it's right on, my starting point is right on the y-axis. So I'm going to think, well, let's see, a positive cosine is something that looks like this. So a negative cosine is going to look like this. And so a negative cosine is what I want to use in this graph. So I'm going to just put in negative cosine, remind me what I'm looking at. Okay, I look and see more or less what number it is on top and on bottom. You're going to see it goes from 5 to negative 5. So the amplitude is 5. My A, I'm just going to write my A as 5, and I'm going to remember it's negative 5 because it's a negative cosine. So I'll just always put A. That'll take care of that absolute value business out. So so I'm just going to remember that it's negative 5. Then I do my B. B is from the period. My period, again, I'm looking at one cycle. Now, you could go middle to middle as long as it just repeats itself. You could go from bottom to bottom. Wherever those numbers are, you just want to go ahead and use them. Well, from bottom to bottom, you can see it's going to be 2. So I want to say 2 is equal to 2 pi over B. Cross multiply. And you're going to see that B is equal to pi. Then I want to see, is there a K? No, there's no vertical shift. I'm done. 2 things here. So I'm just going to write down y is equal to negative 5 cosine pi x. Remember your general curves. Remember who you are and what you stand for. Make good decisions out there. Life can be very confusing, but if you stick to your good ethical choices, whatever they are, you're going to have your good self-confidence and self-worth. Thank you.